The void shook with a sound no alien language could ever capture. It was a roar that made the bones of distant moons vibrate and sent shivers through the neural lattices of her fleet. The alien queen, empress of the Zerithian Dominion, had felt it before. Twice. Once when a rebel colony had dared to resist her, and again when her firstborn had fallen in combat against a puny human militia. But this was different. It was not just fury. It was terror. Her sons, 5 of the largest, deadliest generals in her empire, had vanished without warning. Not in battle. Not through stealth. Simply, gone. Her psychic link to them screamed across the light years, fragmented and chaotic. They were alive. Her mind clawed at the threads of their essence, searching for any hint of betrayal, ambush, or death. Nothing made sense. Her senses detected no force field, no weapon, no trap capable of bypassing the Empire's most sophisticated scanners. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Her sons were missing, plucked from the battlefield as if by a being capable of bending reality itself. On a small, blue-green planet at the fringe of the Zerithian charts, no human fleet waited. No orbital weapons platform hovered in threatening silence. There was nothing but a battered outpost, smoke rising from half-buried tanks, and a single human standing amidst the ruin, hands in pockets, whistling a tune that didn't exist in any known frequency. And there they were. Her sons, sprawled across the human like ragdolls, snoring in a manner that made her psychic tendrils ache. Massive, armored, genetically perfected warriors, immobilized by the audacity of sleep. A human, the audacity, sat there as if nothing in the galaxy could touch him. He didn't hold weapons, he didn't issue commands. He simply existed, a singularity of calm at the epicenter of chaos. The queen bared her fangs and roared into her command array, a sound so furious it cracked the crystal domes of her flagship. "Report! How is this possible? How, my son's gone?" Her lieutenants scrambled, transmitting data from every sensor and spy network. Images came back, her fleet, the crown of her dominion, riddled with explosions and catastrophic system failures. Her dreadnoughts spun out of control. Gravity generators malfunctioned. Shields flickered and failed. Millions of tons of her empire's weaponized assets had been neutralized without a single human casualty. It was unprecedented. General Kale's voice hissed in her mind, ragged with confusion. "Mother, there's no logic here. No pattern. No weapon, no fleet, no agent of war could have done this. They are human," she seethed. "They are creatures of chaos, but even chaos must obey rules." Yet as she focused, she realized that humans did not obey rules. They barely observed them. They bent physics like soft clay, turned catastrophe into opportunity, and, most dangerously, they laughed while doing it. Her sons, her pride, the apex of her empire's martial perfection, were asleep because one human had willed it so. The queen's claws scraped her command chair, a sound that reverberated across the psychic network. "Find him! Bring him to me! I will unmake him before he can laugh again." Meanwhile, Elias Harker, human captain and architect of impossibility, casually adjusted his coat. Around him, the battlefield had become a surreal painting. Alien tanks teetered atop shattered gravity columns, battlesuits twirled helplessly like children's toys in zero gravity, and drones circled aimlessly with their optics fried by some mechanism no Zerithian science could account for. The generals shifted in their sleep, groaning like wounded mountains. Elias smiled faintly. "Guess we're doing this the easy way today," he murmured, lifting a hand. The device he held was no larger than a pebble but thrummed with power that could erase fleets or collapse the very notion of existence. In the void, the queen gathered her fleet. Singularities, plasma cannons, psychic obliterators, and atomic warheads, all aimed at the blue planet where one human dared defy her empire. And still, she hesitated. Every ounce of her being screamed that this was madness. One human? Against her sons? Against her fleet? Against the Zerithian Dominion? But human madness had a method she could not perceive. Elias' calm was not recklessness. It was calculation, a terrifying, meticulous calculation that mocked every assumption she had ever held. Her sons began to stir, twitching in confusion. General Vale muttered in his guttural tongue. What is this feeling? Weakness? Fatigue? Impossible. Nap time, Elias said, in a tone almost casual, and the absurdity made Cale's psychic link to the Queen throb with disbelief. The Queen's fury became a tidal wave. I will rip this human apart limb by limb! Yet even as she unleashed her psychic scream, scanning for the human's location, she noticed an anomaly. Her instruments could not fully penetrate the distortion around him. Space itself seemed to bend, and time, if only for him, curved like a river around a boulder. Every attack, every strike she imagined, would reach him only as delayed echoes. The irony was exquisite. She had built an empire on strategy, on overwhelming force, on psychic supremacy. And yet, here she was, watching one human sit amid the wreckage of her fleet, holding her generals like playthings, entirely untouchable. The Queen realized then what she had feared all along. She had underestimated humans. Not their technology. They were primitive, barely capable of interstellar travel, but their cunning, their audacity, their willingness to exist in defiance of every expectation. And the human was smiling. Elias shifted slightly, the generals on his chest murmuring like infants. He adjusted the pebble-sized device in his palm, which thrummed with soft, terrifying resonance. "This'll wake them up," he muttered. "But first, a nap's in order. Can't have them grumpy when we negotiate." From orbit, the Queen watched, rage boiling into disbelief. The human did not retreat, did not panic, did not even fear. He existed at the center of annihilation and made it look easy. The thought, once inconceivable, now clawed at her scales like acid. Humans were not just clever, they were incomprehensible. Her psychic scream tore through the void, ripping at every fiber of her fleet, yet even this did not seem to disturb the human. He stood, stretching, adjusting the generals on his chest like they were nothing more than sleeping pets. "All right," he said, voice low and calm. "Let's see what's next." And for the first time in millennia, the Queen hesitated. This human, this single, puny creature, was not just defying her empire. He was rewriting the rules of war, the rules of power, and, most dangerously, the rules of reality itself. The war had begun. But not in the way she imagined. It had begun because a human had dared to exist. Elias Harker didn't run. Humans didn't run. Not when the odds were impossible, not when an entire alien empire had underestimated them. He surveyed the field, the ruins of a war the Zerithians had expected to be decisive, and he smirked. A human smirk, the kind that made seasoned generals question the laws of probability. Around him, the battlefield was a surreal tableau. The Zerithian generals, still groggy from the enforced nap, flexed massive claws and wings, their psychic presence thrumming in waves of confusion. Tanks lay crushed, warped by gravity distortions. Drones twitched, sparks flying from fried circuitry. And through it all, Elias moved like a conductor among chaos, unarmed in the conventional sense, yet wielding a lethal genius honed by necessity and years of improbable survival. "Wake up, big guy," he said to General Cale, gently nudging the hulking warrior with a foot. Cale's eyelids fluttered. "This isn't kindergarten." The generals roared, a sound that would have shattered mountains, or entire human cities, if not for the weird stasis field emanating from Elias' device. They lunged, claws slicing the air, but each movement was delayed, each strike softened, each reflex countered by the human's uncanny anticipation. He danced between them, twisting in ways that would snap a human spine, yet he remained unscathed, a blur against titanic muscle and armor. From orbit, the alien queen watched her sons flail. It was an insult of the highest order. Her apex warriors, genetically perfected and psychically enhanced, undone by one puny, impossible human. And that smirk. She couldn't forget it. Elias had already calculated the next move. The device in his hand, a pebble-sized cluster of human ingenuity, wasn't a bomb in the conventional sense. It was worse. It was a paradox field, capable of unmaking matter by folding probability against itself. He didn't need fleets. He didn't need guns. He needed a mind capable of imagining the impossible. With a flick, the field expanded. One Zerithian dreadnought, a warship larger than a small moon, shivered, twisted, and vanished. Not exploded. Not disintegrated. Unmade. The Queen's fleet trembled, her psychic sensors shrieking in horror. A single human, standing amidst the ruins of a planetary outpost, was erasing her empire's pride and terror like it was a doodle on a chalkboard. Impossible, General Vale muttered. No species should have this capability. Elias grinned. Humans are all about the impossible, Vale. You should try it sometime. He kicked a broken drone, which collapsed inward like a paper bag, sparks fizzing. Rules are suggestions. Probability is a guideline. And naps? Absolutely lethal. The generals charged again. This time, coordinated, not with instinct, but with desperate clarity. Claws raked the air, wings whipped like cutting sails, psychic pulses sought to overwhelm. But Elias was ready. He had studied their patterns in milliseconds. He ducked, spun, and activated a secondary field from his coat, a miniature graviton pulse. Tanks, drones, and even the generals themselves were yanked toward each other, colliding with a symphony of metal-on-metal destruction. The battlefield had become a kinetic art installation, terrifying in its precision. Somewhere, deep in the Queen's mind, something snapped. Her sons, her apex instruments of death, were being toyed with. She had built an empire on fear, on overwhelming force, on psychological domination. And yet here she was, watching a human waltz through annihilation like it was a garden stroll. Mother! Kale's voice hissed in her mind, trembling. He is not human. No human could survive this. No, she snarled, claws scraping the psychic chair. But I will unmake him. She unleashed everything. Psychic pulses, gravity distortions, atomic warheads, singularity cannons, all converging on the tiny blue planet. Time dilated around the human, bending like elastic. The blasts arrived seconds too late, or perhaps too early. Elias sidestepped each with uncanny timing, plucking one of the generals from the air mid-flight and rolling under the next. He grinned. You guys really need a nap. One of the generals, Vale, managed a swipe at his head. Elias ducked, caught his forearm, and with a quick flick, redirected Vale's momentum into a collision with another general. Bones cracked. Armor buckled. Elias stepped over the heap without a scratch. And then he laughed. Not a careless laugh. Not a nervous laugh. A human laugh, sharp, intelligent, terrifying in its confidence. It echoed across the battlefield like a clarion call. Do you feel that? He said to the generals, still trying to untangle themselves. That's the universe saying, you're not in charge anymore. Enjoy it. From orbit, the Queen screamed. She had fought civil wars, rebellions, even cosmic predators that devoured entire fleets, and nothing had prepared her for this. One human was systematically dismantling her empire's pride, sanity, and psychic dominance, and he wasn't even breaking a sweat. Then came the audacious move that would etch itself into Zerithian legend. Elias activated the pebble-sized device fully. The field spread outward in concentric waves, each pulse folding reality back onto itself. Dreadnoughts evaporated mid-jump. Frigates twisted into non-existence. Missiles dissolved before leaving their launchers. The very fabric of the battlefield had become a weapon under a human's control. Kale roared, psychic link screaming with pain. How is this possible? No species. Sleep, Elias said, his voice calm, almost gentle, as he approached the generals. Each massive warrior groaned as the field coaxed them back into unconsciousness. Nap time again. You'll feel better. The Queen's fury boiled over. Her psychic scream shattered planetary atmospheres. She directed every cannon, every dreadnought, every singularity in her arsenal at Elias, aiming to obliterate the impossible human. Elias didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head, watching the destructive ballet unfold. Then, with a casual wave of his hand, he extended the paradox field. Every weapon fired at him was reflected, folded back, and rendered inert. His grin widened. Really? That's all you got? Her sons, now draped across his shoulders like sleeping infants, stirred faintly. They were massive, lethal, psychic titans, yet here they were, under the command of a human who treated cosmic annihilation like a tea party. The Queen realized the truth. She had not fought an enemy. She had encountered a force of nature. She had underestimated humans. Again. Elias straightened, stretching slightly. All right, boys, he murmured. Time to wake up. Don't worry, I've got your naps covered. The generals twitched, groaning in sync as the device pulsed softly, a lullaby and a warning. And somewhere, in the void, the Queen shivered. One human had turned the entire battlefield into his playground. One human had made her apex warriors look like infants. One human had declared, without words, that in this galaxy, rules did not apply. The war had not just begun, it had been rewritten. The void itself seemed to bend in anticipation. The Queen's fleets were in chaos, her generals groaning under the weight of improbable sleep, and yet she refused to yield. Pride and fury fused into a psychic scream that radiated across light years, rattling the atoms of every ship within her empire. Elias Harker didn't flinch. Humans didn't flinch. Not in the face of annihilation, not when the impossible hung in the air like a storm waiting to strike. He stood on the cracked metal slab, dwarfed by the hulking generals sprawled across him, yet radiating the kind of confidence that made even veterans of war pause. His hands hovered over the pebble-sized device at his belt, a human weapon that defied description. This wasn't about firepower, armor, or psychic domination. This was about understanding chaos and bending it into an advantage, something humans had done since the dawn of their species. From orbit, the Queen unleashed everything she had left. Singularity cannons, plasma disintegrators, psychic obliterators. Their combined force should have been the end of Elias, the end of this planet, the end of hope itself. Yet as the beams struck, reality warped. Time slowed, then accelerated, then folded upon itself. The cannon's impact fizzled against the paradox field, each explosion redirected in a way that shredded the Queen's calculations. Humans! Kale rasped, finally awake enough to comprehend the horror. They're impossible. They should be dead. They are dead, Elias said lightly, brushing dust from his coat. Just not in the way you think. The generals lunged. Now awake, now furious, they brought all their psychic might and physical force to bear. Each was a mountain of muscle and telepathic power, yet they moved as if wading through molasses. Elias sidestepped, ducked, and countered with gestures so subtle they seemed absurd. A flick here, a push there, and suddenly Kale's momentum carried him into Vale, knocking both into a crater while sparking their armor. Elias grinned. See? I told you naps were dangerous. But the Queen was not done. She focused her entire psychic might on the battlefield, reaching into the very synapses of Elias' mind, seeking to destroy him, to bend him to her will, to make him scream. A human should have faltered. A human should have crumbled. Elias tilted his head, eyes narrowing. Then, casually, he activated the secondary pulse. A field expanded across the entire battleground, bending gravity, folding space, and twisting probability. The Queen's flagship trembled, its weapons malfunctioning as their targeting algorithms collided with logical paradoxes. The fleet screamed, figuratively, if not literally, as their commands became contradictory, their engines opposed, their ammunition unmade before launch. This cannot be! Kale roared, psychic resonance cracking the air. No one, no species, should be able to do this! Elias smiled, almost pitying. Humans don't play by your rules. We make our own. He reached down, lightly tapping each general on the chest. They collapsed immediately, once more lulled into sleep by the subtle pulse of the device. There. All better. You'll thank me later. And then came the audacious twist. Elias approached the battlefield's heart, the Queen herself. Her fleet's remaining ships screamed toward him, singularity cannons blazing. It should have been impossible for one human to survive. Yet Elias activated the final sequence on his device. It wasn't destruction. It wasn't weapons. It was containment. A stasis grid folded outward, capturing ships mid-flight, freezing them in time and space, leaving the Queen's fleet trapped in their own momentum. Her psychic scream shredded stars. "I will not allow this!" Elias didn't respond with words. He responded with logic no alien mind had ever faced. One by one, he plucked ships from their trajectory, redirecting them harmlessly into empty space. Dreadnoughts spun helplessly in zero-G. Plasma cannons fizzled mid-charge. Missiles never launched. The battlefield had become a playground under a human's control. Finally, he stepped forward, carrying the generals like they were infants. "All right," he said softly. "Time to wake up. Don't worry, I've got your naps covered." The Queen's mind shrieked. Her sons, her apex warriors, had been completely neutralized, not destroyed but rendered utterly helpless by a human who wielded nothing more than intellect, timing, and improbable audacity. "You will pay for this, human!" the Queen hissed, psychic tendrils snapping. "I am the Dominion! I am—" "Relax," Elias said, cutting her off with a smirk. "You're fine. Take a deep breath. Maybe go for a nap yourself?" It was a mockery so exquisite it rattled the Queen's scales. One human had not only defeated her sons but neutralized her fleet, rendered her empire's tactics useless, and done it with humor. With style. With audacity. She could destroy this planet in an instant. She could annihilate Elias in the blink of an eye. And yet she hesitated. Humans were unpredictable. Infuriating. Terrifying. A species that would fight back when the universe told them to kneel, laugh in the face of annihilation, and somehow win anyway. Elias set down the sleeping generals, crouching beside them. "You guys really should thank me. This could have been messy." He glanced up at the Queen, unarmed, unafraid, and entirely composed. "I like your trying, though. Really. Makes it fun." The Queen seethed. She had fought wars that lasted millennia. She had crushed rebellions, devoured rivals, and obliterated planets. And yet here she was, watching a human stand in the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by sleeping Zerithian generals, and alive. Somewhere deep inside, a kernel of realization took hold. She had underestimated humans. Not their technology, not their size, not their fleet. Their minds. Their willingness to defy logic, expectation, and probability. They were not soldiers. They were forces of nature. And nature, she realized, could not be controlled. Elias stood, brushing dust from his coat. "All right," he said. "Let's wrap this up. You guys have had enough excitement for one day." From orbit, the Queen felt the sting of humiliation and awe. Her empire's pride had been shredded. Her apex warriors neutralized. Her fleets rendered useless. And yet she could not strike, could not anticipate the next move. Humans didn't play predictably. They didn't obey laws. They survived, and thrived, where others fell. The battlefield was silent now, save for the faint hum of the paradox device and the soft snoring of 5 alien generals draped across a human's shoulders. Elias Harker, in the Queen's mind, was now less a threat than a phenomenon. And in the shadow of her defeat, she realized the most terrifying truth: this human was not just a warrior. He was a warning. The war had shifted. The rules were gone. And the Dominion would never look at humans the same way again. The battlefield was silent, but it was a deceptive calm. Smoke drifted from the shattered remains of alien dreadnoughts. Gravity wells hung like broken ornaments in the air. The 5 Zerithian generals, titanic warriors bred for conquest, were sprawled across Elias Harker's shoulders and chest, completely inert, lulled into submission by the subtle pulse of a human device. From orbit, the Queen watched the devastation. Her psychic tendrils screamed in frustration. Every plan, every calculation, every fleet she had ever commanded had crumbled before a single human. She had expected cleverness, maybe even courage, But this? This was blasphemy in her understanding of the cosmos. Elias stood at the center of the ruined outpost, dust falling from his coat, arms crossed. Not a scratch marked him. Not a dent in his armor. He looked around, surveying the wreckage with casual precision, as if he had merely taken a morning stroll. The Queen's mind flared in fury. I am the Dominion! I am your end! My sons, my fleet, how dare you! Elias raised an eyebrow. Look, I get it. You're mad. I'd be mad too, if a few planets worth of my stuff exploded while I was napping. But here's the thing, you look angry. Ever tried meditation? The Queen's psychic scream tore through the atmosphere of the planet, and yet it did nothing. Her ships were frozen in stasis. Her generals were neutralized. Her control over the battlefield had been completely erased. And all that remained was one human standing in the ruins, whistling a tune that didn't exist. You cannot just... the Queen hissed. Elias walked forward, step by step, approaching the massive generals. Each one groaned, stirring lightly. He crouched, brushing dust from the armor of Vale, and whispered, Time to wake up. The universe won't wait for your feelings. The generals blinked, slowly regaining awareness, confusion and fury wrestling on their faces. They looked at the human who had not only outsmarted them but rendered their weapons useless, erased their fleet, and turned the battlefield into a playground. You humans, you are insane! Kale muttered, trying to rise but realizing Elias' device held them in check. Insanity is a point of view, Elias said. And clearly, my point of view is working. The Queen, watching her empire crumble, felt something unfamiliar, fear. Not for herself, not yet, but for the empire she had believed unassailable. One species, puny, fragile, and chaotic, had rewritten the rules of war. She had underestimated humans. Again. And humans, she realized, did not just fight. They adapted. They improvised. They survived. And when the odds were impossible, they laughed. Elias turned his attention to the Queen. You could destroy me. You could vaporize this planet. You could erase every human colony within a light year. And maybe one day, someone will try. But right now, I think we need a new understanding. The Queen's psychic scream rose to a crescendo, her fury radiating like a nova. You dare! I dare! Elias said, interrupting again. Because I know something you don't. Humans survive. Humans endure. And humans, they're unpredictable. Right now, you've got the upper hand if you act. But if you wait, if you hesitate, you'll find out just how creative one species can be when pushed to the edge. The Queen's mind flared, calculating options. She could annihilate him. She could crush this planet under her fleet. And yet, every calculation, every option, every tactic had already failed once. She hesitated. Elias smiled. See? It's called a warning. You'll remember it. Then he did the unthinkable. He activated the device once more, extending a field over the remaining fleet and the generals. Not to destroy, not to enslave, but to contain. He had neutralized the Queen's forces without spilling blood unnecessarily. It was a lesson, a demonstration, and a threat all at once. The generals blinked awake fully, realizing that their power, their fleet, and even their psychic dominance were now at the mercy of a human. Vale muttered. He controls everything, and he hasn't even touched the Queen. Humans like subtlety, Elias said. And naps. He gently laid each general down. Seriously, you guys need to sleep more. Saves lives. The Queen recoiled, fury and disbelief clashing inside her mind. She had ruled by fear, domination, and absolute power. And yet, she could not kill this human. Not without risking everything she had left. And she understood, in a moment of stark clarity, that humans were not just dangerous. They were beyond prediction. Elias took a step back. So here's the deal, he said, casually whistling again. I don't need war to win. I don't need fleets. I don't need your empire to crumble completely. All I need is to remind you what happens when you underestimate humans. The Queen's claws scraped against her throne, sparks flying. You, insolent creature! You will pay. Sure, Elias said with a faint grin. Eventually. But for now, we're done here. He gestured to the sleeping generals draped across him. You've got some cleanup to do, and so do I. And with that, he turned, striding across the ruined outpost with a casual confidence that made even the Queen pause. The human was alive, unbroken, and entirely untouchable. He had not just survived, he had redefined the battlefield. The Queen's mind roared, furious, humiliated, and in awe. Humans were not soldiers. They were forces of nature. And nature, she realized, could not be predicted, controlled, or defeated so easily. Elias walked off the battlefield, carrying 5 alien generals like they were nothing more than kittens. And somewhere in the void, the Queen swore she would remember the sound of his laugh forever, a sound that promised humans would never be underestimated again. The war had not ended. But the rules had changed. And humanity, as always, had made sure everyone knew exactly who was dangerous.